Aloha, everybody. Welcome to another live stream. This is our second official live stream. So appreciate Mr. Atearoa for your time. How are you doing today and what you've been up to?
Good tour. Just a typical Saturday here in New Zealand. Cold. Nothing much. Just did some usual Saturday cleaning and stuff, and yeah, it's pretty chill day though. But it's cold here in New Zealand, but all is good.
Awesome. We're kicking off the weekend here. Obviously, it's Friday. You're a day ahead of us. We're
Hmm.
excited for the weekend. But we're really excited. We have some cool stories here to kind of walk through today. We have a handful of stories. We're going to start off with a story from BYU. Want to kind of give some background on it, Mussy, and we're kind of giving an update. This is it made national news for a
Yeah.
while, but it's from BYU, from my alma mater. But kind of give some background on this story, Mussy.
So this story is there was a volleyball event that happened at BYU, and a volleyball player from Duke. This was against the women's volleyball competition. So it was a Duke University that this young woman accused a BYU fan throwing out racial slurs at her, and that person was suspended for some time during the investigation. That was from BYU, and then during this whole hoorah event, it it went national news, kind of portraying that BYU and the state of Utah was a racist state and school until further investigation by BYU happened, and they found out that there was no evidence of any racial slurs that was used against the Duke player, the Duke woman, and yeah, so the person was taken back. Um,
Mm.
like they rescinded their suspension on this kid to attend BYU athletic events. So, but this is a podcast from I believe this guy's name is Jimmy Rex, and this he gives the opportunity for the father of the victim and also the victim himself to explain their side of the story, and also just kind of how everything went down.
Unfolded. Yeah.
Yes.
Because like
So
you said, Mussy, this went from like 0 to 60 in like 2 seconds, right? Like
yes,
all of a sudden it was all over ESPN, even on national news, like on your
yes,
CNNs and stuff. It just caught on fire.
yes, yes. So, and I just thought it would be cool just to talk about it. I mean, I didn't graduate from BYU. I graduated Utah Valley University, the
Right
same as
down
this
the street.
victim, right down the
Yeah.
street. But I'm a BYU football fan, and also a lot of my family and extended family were they've all attended BYU or BYU affiliates. So I'm a BYU fan. So I just thought this was a relevant topic to kind of discuss.
Yeah. We'll jump right into it, Mussy. And we'll just kind of watch through it. Let me know if you want to stop anywhere. If I see a spot we want to kind
Yeah,
of sit and talk to.
yeah.
I'm also going to turn on the comments here. Um, Wow, we already have some comments out here. Do y'all know about Rockwell, Texas? I think Polynesians built it just like the mound builders. That is a good
Oh
question. Are you familiar with that, Mussy?
no, 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 no. I'm not too sure. Not too sure with that. Was it
Okay.
Rockwell?
Rockwall, Texas.
Rockwell.
This is from David Totai. He just shared it. I
Well,
mean, it looks like it's a town off of I-30.
definitely have
Um,
to look into that
yeah,
more. I'm not.
we're
I'm
gonna.
not aware of it.
Yeah, so Rockwall is a city in Rock. Let me just share this real quick for David. Before we jump into it. So this is Rockwall. I'm not sure if this is who you're referring to, David, in the comments, but Rockwall is a city in Rockwall County, Texas,
Oh, it's in
which is part
Dallas
of
area.
Dallas Fort Worth. Well, I'll tell
Mm,
you this: there's a ton of Tongans over there in the
yeah.
DFW, the HEB area. So yeah, we'll look into that, David. So I appreciate that comment, and that's David from YouTube. He's tuning in from YouTube on that. So I just opened up. Are you able to see the comments on your end, Mussy?
No, no. I'm only seeing the city of Rockwall that you have up
Okay.
on the.
All right. Yeah. So that's David. Oh, yeah. He said, yeah, that's it. Um,
Okay.
We'll check that out, David. I appreciate you giving us a heads up on that. We'll look into that, and if we find anything, we'll definitely add that to future streams. But I appreciate the comments. He's from Euless, Texas.
Mm,
So
mm,
there's a ton of Tongans. I used to live in Euless, Texas,
yeah.
in the HEB area. Tons of Tongans. What is it? Main Street, David. You drive down Main Street. There's like the Church of Tonga. There's
Maria.
yeah, it's hilarious, dude. I was
It's
like,
got a little Tongan community there, huh?
it is Tonga. Like I said, I was driving down with my wife, and I didn't realize that there were a bunch of like Tongan churches in a row. It was like the
Mm,
Church of Tonga, a Catholic Tongan church, Seventh-day
wow.
Adventist, and I was like, oh yeah, way. Tao foki tao tolgi Tonga he taimigo.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
was pretty impressed.
Especially with the different denomination. I was just thinking like a LDS Tongans
No,
there, but there's quite a
yeah.
few different Tongans from different faiths, so that's pretty cool.
Hey David, I gotta tell you this story. It's hilarious, and then we'll go into the BYU video here. But I just moved to the Euless area, and my wife wanted to buy a bunk beds, and I didn't have a truck. I just had a little Hyundai Sonata. So I go to the U-Haul to go rent. You can rent a U-Haul for like, it was like $20 for the day. So I was gonna
Mm,
rent a U-Haul to go pick up the bunk beds that I had just bought. And I show up, and there's just this older lady in there, and she's like, I walk in, and she looks at me, and she goes, "Thank goodness for you boys." And I was like, "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" And then she comes over and she goes, "Did you go to Trinity High School?" And I said, "Nah, I didn't. I went to high school in Hawaii, but it seems like everybody that I know went to Trinity." And
mm,
she goes, "Oh yeah, back in like 1984, nobody knew about us in football. We didn't do
mm.
anything in football." And then she goes, "Then you Polynesians showed up." And she's just like, "And we love you guys. Now we win state championships. Now we're on the map. Everybody knows about Trinity now."
That's a
So
cool history from that
that
lady saying that Trinity was nowhere to be found in the football scene until Polynesians came with
100%.
their families and just participated.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I was like, I had just moved there like less than 2 weeks. And right off the bat, she just looks as a Polynesian dude. And first thing she comes is like, "Thank goodness for you boys. If it wasn't for you guys, nobody would know who the heck we are." But I appreciate that, David. Appreciate the comments. We'll
Mm,
jump into the video here. Any questions from the viewers, please add it
yeah.
into the comments. We're streaming live on YouTube. We're also streaming live on X and then also on Facebook. And we track all those comments, and they'll come through. If there's a comment that comes through social media on something they want us to comment on, we will definitely make an effort to respond to that. With that being said, we'll jump right into it.
If you're okay with this, I'd rather we just let him tell the story of what happened. I think I kind of already prefaced it a little bit, and then we'll come back to you. I do want to get like your take how this affected you and why this is. I think this is probably of the three things. This is the one that was most strongly probably got you off the fence to kind of try to make a difference and get into politics in the first place. But I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it just seems like I know it's a very emotional thing. But I can imagine being the father, and we'll tell the story first, people, and have some context. But we got Josh here. Josh, how old are you, by the way?
21.
21. Okay. And you are a student at UVU, correct?
That's right.
Okay. And so I want to take it back. When did that happen? A year and a half ago?
Yeah, it happened late August of 2022.
Oh, so 2 years ago. Okay. Yeah. Well, I remember just hearing again the story. Long story short, BYU's playing Duke in volleyball. Big game, very emotional game. I think BYU beat them, but Duke was pretty good. And then all kind of hell broke loose. But you ended up having quite the debacle going on. Why don't you just kind of briefly tell us kind of what happened from your point of view, and then I'll follow up with some questions for you. Okay. And this is the first time you've really spoken about this ever. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, cool. Well, tell us what happened.
Well, so it was the opening night of the 2022 women's volleyball season, and I was in the very front row of the student section, right behind the players. And the game went on as normal through the.
And just to pause that real quick, so kind of everybody who's not familiar with the Smith Fieldhouse, this is like right next. When he says he's in the front row, he is like right next to the players because it's a small space. There is a second level that's in there.
What's
but
the
it's
capacity? What's the capacity? 10,000? 15? No.
I'd probably say more
8,000?
like around, it's under 10-ish.
Yeah.
I'd probably say more around between 6 and 8, but it could be 10. So when he's saying he's right in the front row, it's like front row, like in the basketball. So he's right up there.
No, and another thing is, I've been to a volleyball game at BYU too, and when I just showed up to that game, it was packed, and apparently BYU is known for all its like non-football or even basketball, the other sports. BYU does have a good turnout, so I'm assuming this was a rocking a
Yeah.
crowd too when Duke was coming, and they were top two during that
And
time.
no, 100%. And, I've been to the Duke area. I've driven through Duke University when I lived in Virginia. We would go to like the medical centers in that area. Duke is a ritzy area, man. This is not, this is kind of like BYU. It's a private school, wooded area, nice area. So, you don't go to Duke and not have some money in the background unless you're in sports, right? If you're in sports, hey, great. That's your ticket in there. That was like me at St. Louis. The only reason why I was at St. Louis was because of sports. There's no way you can afford it apart from that. So we'll jump right back in.
The first two sets. And in set 3, an officer went and stood right in front of the student section. Since I'd never seen an officer at a game before, I asked him, "What's going on? This is unusual." And he said, "We've heard reports of inappropriate language coming from the student section." And I said, "Well, I haven't heard anything from here, but I'll let you know if I do hear anything." And that was pretty much it. And I talked to the officer briefly in set 4, which was a very convincing win for BYU, which was the match clinching set. And after that, after the game ended, I stayed in the same spot. And
by the way, you knew some of the players or something, right, at BYU?
Yes, 3 players. 3 players I know really well, and one of them I actually grew up with and went to my church seminary class with. And there's another player on the men's volleyball team who's in that same class.
See the show. Experience the excitement.
We'll skip this.
You grew up with these guys. You went to pretty much every game, yeah?
Every game. Like my freshman year, I went to every home game plus an away game. So
cool. All right, so go on.
So the match ends, and I end up staying in pretty much the same spot. Everyone in the stadium leaves. And by the way, it was an attendance record sellout crowd that night in the stadium.
These volleyball games they're rushes.
It's one of the best
it's
college
fun.
volleyball environments in the country.
It's like really tight gym. Like you can see why people could get super intimidated. It's fun. I used to go to them all the time.
Yeah, it's awesome. Like I still enjoy it. And
BYU overall, even on the voted most hated basketball arena to compete in is BYU, right? Because you're at the Marriott Center. It's the same thing with the Smith Fieldhouse, right? Because it's just jam-packed. People are yelling. And so there's a lot of emotion and a lot of energy in these games.
And isn't the Marriott Center just pretty huge? I mean, if it's like
25,
so it's bigger than a lot of
22 to 25. Yeah. Bigger than some
bigger
NBA.
than a lot of NBA arenas. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is intense. If you haven't been to a BYU volleyball game, this is not like your stereotypical game. Like people are out there.
People show
they
up.
Got their screaming and playing.
Yeah.
And so about 5 minutes after the match ends, I see a bunch of players in blue walking out of the locker rooms and onto the court. And the players, and for context, BYU was wearing black during the match, but Duke was in blue. But I saw players from both teams coming out of the locker room. All of them were wearing blue. And I was about 8 to 10 feet behind a player in blue, thinking she was one of my friends on BYU's team. But I see someone in Blue Devils gear, like it said Blue Devils, come up to me and in a very confrontational way, say like, get away from us. And I realized it was Duke. I go, Duke. And I went, oh, sorry about that. And then just walked away without saying anything because the BYU players had just walked out at about that same moment. So then I did go talk to them after the match.
Saying hi to your friends or what?
Yeah, exactly.
And was that regular thing for you? Like, did you always stay late for them and go talk to them?
I always did. Yeah. Like I always do that now. Like, so I would, after games, I would go hang out with them, with the players on the men's and women's teams who I know, and we like go get dinner and that sort of thing. And I still do that after a lot of the games.
Got it.
And so they weren't able to do it because they were celebrating the first one of the season, but so I go to leave. And as I'm leaving the stadium, another police officer stops me and he says, Duke was adamant that you were yelling racial slurs the entire match. And I go, I'm sorry, what? What are you talking about? I don't know what you mean. And he said the fan was wearing a yellow shirt and would you mind showing me where you were sitting? I said, yes, I'll show you. And I showed him the front row of the student section about 6-7 feet away from the players on the bench. And he said, yes, this is exactly where the racial slurs were reported. And this whole time, this officer was taking a very confrontational tone.
By the way, have you ever had a run in at this point with officers before?
No.
Pretty intimidating.
Yeah.
I've had plenty when I was a kid. I remember one time walking down the street, I was just going to the 7-Eleven with my buddy and back, and an officer stopped us and he said there'd been, a bunch of break-ins or whatever. And it was like 2 young guys. And like, he was really grilling me. And I was probably, 14. I just remember being so intimidated. And if you've never had that experience, like that authority, it's like, there's an energy to it that's really intimidating because like you're afraid to say the wrong thing. You're afraid to like, they can do whatever they want essentially in that situation. And so I see what, I mean, anyway, I just empathize with that situation because I've had that before.
So
and I just want to kind of comment on that real quick, Mussy, because if I remember correctly, Provo Police Department went through a little bit of an issue. Yeah.
Yes. No, they're known for some bad
So there's the
reputation.
Provo, but I'm assuming this might be the BYU police. Maybe.
Yes.
Yeah,
Isn't BYU have their own police? That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And even then I heard there was a little bit of an issue even internally in certain reporting issues. So kind of
you would know for attending there, so I'm not too sure.
Yeah, I mean there were like nothing major, but I do know there was some controversy on certain things for the Provo Police Department. I heard a little bit of the rumblings in the BYU police. But I mean, yeah, when a police officer shows up, and we got to remember about a year and a half ago, the racial tension was pretty heavy, right? So when somebody comes with you and accusing this, when George Floyd stuff's going on, there's a lot of tension, a lot of concern, and then a young kid being confronted by a police officer, that even adds to the tension.
No, and just to add to that, it is intimidating, especially when I had some run in with the police too in Provo just for like no reason, and then you can just feel with like when he starts using the tone of being very confrontational, maybe when it's not necessary. So
yeah,
it's really important. I'm not saying police for the majority are good, but yeah, it does help when police when they address somebody to don't be so confrontational in the beginning unless there's imminent threat. So
no, 100%.
But yeah, Provo. I can only speak to Provo. I don't know about BYU police, but Provo Police Department was known for its bad reputation for just some bad apples in the police department that was just acting in a way that's not your typical behavior like of a police officer. So yeah,
understood. Not 100%.
So what I said to him is, I said I did not use any racial slurs, and I mean, one, I never have, and if I had heard anybody in the student section yelling racial slurs, I would have reported it to you guys immediately. That's all I can say. And then at around that time, the officer who was standing next to me for the second half of the match shows up, and that officer was the supervisor. and so he told the confrontational officer to leave. So it was just me and the other officer, and then that officer asked me for my like student ID, and I told him I was a UVU student.
He was the cop that was kind of standing by you for part of the time.
Yes.
Okay.
And so he asked for my information, which I gave him, and he said, for your own safety, I'm going to escort you off BYU property. And so I agreed, and he asked me like if I had a license plate number, like if I had a car. I told him.
Why is that for his own safety to escort him off of BYU? Just say you want to escort him out of BYU. You're not going to be. Don't lie to him and say it's for his safety, because ain't nobody going to do anything. You know what I mean? So why is he saying like, man, what? This sneaky, this guy. Oh man, what a lie. Anyways,
no, I just take the bus between campuses because I live by UVU anyway. So he escorted me off BYU property and sent me on my way back to Orem. So a few hours later, about 5 minutes before midnight, I got a call from BYU, and they said that they had made the decision to ban me.
Wait, what time was it?
Like 11:55
at night.
At night, yeah.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Oh my goodness!
They
How
said
quick
we've
is
made
that?
the decision to ban you from all BYU athletic events.
So that's like what, 2 hours?
Yeah. You know, and this is the thing that I thought that was a bit that BYU made the mistake. Odd. Why would, and this is just my personal opinion. Like what you said, this was in the heightened time with the race issue at the moment, but you know, BYU acted too quickly without knowing exactly what happened. And when you do something like this, when you're suspending, even when you're during investigation, they could have just said, "Hey, we're investigating. We just want you to stay. We're not going to
Stay off
suspend you." But
campus. Don't come. Just
yes,
stay
but
clear while
instead
we
of
figure this out.
when you're portraying to you're portraying somebody that he's doing it because you're suspending him. It's you're kind of picking sides already, that this Duke volleyball player has some legitimacy. But yeah, it's BYU shouldn't have acted that way, and
Yeah.
it's not right. I mean, it's not the right thing to do for
No,
BYU.
that I agree, especially unless they showed up and said, "Hey, we got video evidence of this guy." Okay,
Yeah,
you know, but obviously they didn't have that.
it's he
But,
or her saying,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and then like you're saying, like 2 hours later, come on.
that's ridiculous.
You know the phone calls that has to happen for something like that? If it's legit, right? If they legitimately said we got to cancel him, this is not just the one or two guys making that decision, you know, Mickey Mouse guys. These are at the very least athletic director and even possibly above to kind of pull the trigger on that. So
BYU president, I'm sure, was
probably
part of the
was
conversation.
consulted. Yeah, because they're all right now. I can guarantee you this was all damage control in their mind. This is just damage control. Like, oh, we got to act now and contain this in worst case scenario, rather than thinking, well, what's the truth?
What's crazy? Just doing what's right. Yes.
Yep.
As we begin the investigation, and I was just like, seriously? And they're like, yeah, we're gonna. This is the ban's effective immediately. And like, wow. I told them like I did not use any racial slurs at the match tonight or ever. Like that's all I know. And so I wake up in the morning and I saw that BYU Athletics had released a statement saying that.
And by the way, this was like, for those that do give context to the listeners, like most of you probably remember this, but if not, it became like this giant story. Like every single news station was talking about it. It was the number one story on ESPN. South Carolina's basketball coach, women's basketball coach, who's like the most famous coach in the country, came out and said she was canceling games with BYU. I mean, it was a big deal very fast. So you wake up to this storm going on.
Yeah. So I woke up to that, and it was all over CNN, ESPN, Fox News, ABC, NBC, anything you can think of, like everything. And it's definitely a jarring way to wake up.
Take us to the experience of that. What did that feel like to wake up knowing that you hadn't done anything, but yet this was put on you in this moment? Like, did you think you might be arrested? You were just scared for your safety? Like, what was going on with you emotionally?
I never thought I would be arrested, but I was definitely afraid for my safety of being identified.
Just like what that would do to your reputation.
Oh yeah. definitely like in like having that branding associated with me.
For sure.
And really not. I
Yeah.
mean, see, that's the thing of why, if with BYU reacting so quickly, you could have gotten this guy now really hurt, right? Like if he's walking down somewhere and
Out of state
someone
or just
sees
whatever. 'Cause-
exactly, and they're like, "Hey, that's the racist guy."
Yeah.
And then, let's say he's trying to get a job somewhere, even though that's illegal. But I'm just saying this impacts people.
Yeah.
So to just jump the gun, that
Yeah.
could have been really bad for this guy.
No, and another thing that the story was pretty intriguing is, BYU is your school that is usually the forefront to kind of do what is right, and it's not your typical university because it has the church affiliation
Expectation there. Yep.
expectation there, and that's why I was surprised because I felt like BYU was bending towards the worldly perspective of that image of what BYU could be accused of instead of doing what was the right thing to do. Just wait it
Yeah.
out. Just don't do any, because when you're saying because I remember BYU was already telling the news outlets that they were suspending this person until while they're doing the investigation. But when you're suspending somebody and banning them from coming to the events, you have some kind
Campus,
of
everything.
camp
Yeah.
you have some kind of evidence that suggests that this person was guilty, and that this is
Guilty.
a young man. This is a young man that's being painted this way, even though he didn't do anything that's probably mentally, emotionally probably taking a huge effect on him. So
No, 100%, 100%. And he seems like a relatively
yeah,
kind of timid. He doesn't
yeah,
come across as somebody running around trying to, cause trouble.
instigate, yeah,
Yeah.
And but I got another call from my friends on the volleyball team who I've known for a few years, and they told me that they got my name and that they knew that I was the band fan, and that they said that they stood by me, and that they knew that I was innocent and did not do what I was accused of. And
Nice.
the entire BYU women's volleyball team stood by me through the entire thing.
That's cool. So when did it start to leak that maybe this didn't happen? Because I mean, it was pretty quickly. Also, just weird things started coming out. Like, hold on a second, this doesn't sound like this actually happened. I can't remember the exact timeline. Do you remember exactly what happened next?
Yeah. So it started to leak that the story didn't actually happen about 3 days later.
Let me show you how we do stuff around here. Actually, my department uses Monday.com, so I'm good. Work.
And
in the meanwhile, like, what did BYU come out with more statements? They started an investigation, right?
Yes.
So they're basically, I maybe Jason, better than this, but how many people, like, how did the investigation go? Well, I actually want to bring you in right here. So, I mean, your son's going through this. I'm sure by this point he's contacted you. Like, what's going on in your mind?
Well, the first thing I was thinking is, you got to be kidding me. So it's been a tough couple of years, right?
Wow.
Because
you've already had your issues with BYU.
I mean, we already had the thing with Jessica.
Yeah.
We were begging BYU to release public statements about her death, and they released nothing anywhere.
Wait a second. What is that? Like, what happened there, dude?
It seems like this gentleman here had a daughter that that happened with BYU.
Is she the one that went like hiking and died?
I think so. And apparently, he had a issue with BYU regarding how they handled that. And then now this thing is happening to his son. Isn't that crazy, with the same family? And then the way BYU is treated. And the funny thing is, this guy is a BYU alumni. That's the funny thing about it. So
I'm trying to search to see.
yeah, apparently I didn't check it out or anything, but apparently he had a run-in with BYU with his daughter.
Yeah, because I
I'm
see
not
a
too sure.
guy. I see a guy who passed away, but interesting.
Yeah.
I'm wondering. So that's why he's saying, "Oh, you got to be kidding me!"
Yeah,
Like, we already have issues on another thing, and this is coming again with BYU again. Okay,
Yeah.
dang. If any of the viewers have an idea of what that story is, please share in the comment.
And then, so secondly, now they're going after my kid who doesn't even go to BYU. And then my daughter is sitting in her classes at BYU listening to her BYU professors rant about this terrible racist kid from UVU. My daughter has to just eat that.
So it's not the one who passed away.
So for our whole family, it was hard. I was
probably.
actually out of town with my wife at a business trip. Play your violins for me, but we were in Hawaii.
Sure.
and while we were there, my wife, I was speaking to a couple hundred of our leaders. And when I was finished, Kristen pulled me aside and said, "Here's what's happening." And so I immediately went and watched all the video, and you could just immediately tell from the video, BYU's own video, that what the player was saying couldn't possibly be true. Right. So she was saying that the reports I read said that she said that the racial slurs kept escalating.
But if I recall, you know the details, I'm sure better than me because it's a vague story at this point, but like he would have had to have been yelling past like multiple people on the bench and Duke. And it was just like the logistics of it just didn't add up. I think that's part of why I remember Clay.
And that's the thing. Like, why would BYU react so quickly without strange?
Yes. Well, and here's the thing. I felt like the BYU women volleyball players did the right thing. They stand by the guy, the kid, and they believed him more than what he's being accused of, and they did the right thing, and just saying that they trusted him, because it's like what you said. If he's the only one saying it, there's got to be other people that would testify and say yes, they would have heard. But when no one is saying anything, it's a bit odd. And
yeah,
it's
and at
so
BYU,
surprising.
a lot of people would have complained, not just one person.
Yes, no, and it's just so surprising how they managed this was not good. And I hope in the future BYU does a lot better than this, and not bend so quickly to outside pressure and all of that.
Wow. Yeah, this is crazy.
Travis breaking it down and some of these other big, more like conservative voices, I think Glenn Beck, and just people just like, hold on a second. And this kept happening at that time, right? With these false narratives of racism happening. And I'll tell a quick story actually, because I think it's maybe a good place to inject my own experience of this. A couple of years back, it was right before COVID. There was this kid going to Pleasant Grove High School, really good kid. And his black kid, he was adopted from Haiti. And there was a story came out in the news on the Salt Lake Tribune of his car had been vandalized. And there was this ongoing, just like things happening to this kid and they called it racially motivated. So I'm like getting ready to go to bed. I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me. It's like 10 at night. And I like 100 comments in a row of like, Utah's racist, is horrible. This is somebody's got to do something about this. And I remember like getting ready to go to bed. I'm like, hey, I think I can do something about this. Like I used to be roommates with a lot of the players at BYU who were black. And we never saw firsthand people just violently or just angrily coming after them. It was more like they were unfamiliar with it, or they just didn't know a lot of black people. I mean, it's a very white state, but I was like, I don't know if this is, but you don't know. It's like you get a couple bad eggs at their school. Yeah. A bunch of racist kids. Like, of course it's happening. So I jump into action. I was friends with the NBA guys at the time, the Jazz players. So I contact Rudy and Donovan and these different guys and, Kyle Van Noy, Fred Warner, some of these big athletes from the NFL, and they all jump in. Everyone wants to help support this kid. And the whole point was just change the narrative, like help this kid so he feels loved, and help this city of Pleasant Grove, like get your shit together. It's 2023 or whatever, 19. Why are we still dealing with this, And so we ended up raising all this money. We got he was on the soccer team. We got their whole soccer team cleats, car washes for life. All these business owners in Utah contributed, and we'd raised a bunch of money so I ended up I wanted to meet with the principal of Pleasant Grove so I could see how we could bring everyone together. And by the way, the kid got to go front row in Jazz game. He got the shoes of Donovan, and Rudy bought the tickets. It was just amazing things happening for this kid. It was really cool. It really changed the narrative of the story. But I go to meet, this is the part of the story I don't share very often. I go to meet with the principal of Pleasant Grove, and he's like, hey man, I got to tell you something. Like, this kid's the most popular kid in school. This isn't racism. This isn't a racist thing. It's like, it's a prank war. His dad doesn't know. This has been ongoing with him and his friends back and forth, doing stuff to each other for like a long time. And I'm like, what do I do with this? I'm just like, so we were like, whatever, we've raised the money. We've got all these things donated. So we throw this big party at Pleasant Grove High for this kid. And we ended up throwing the party. And I mean, it was like, the whole point was to unite this kid and everybody at the school. And the kid didn't even go to the party because the cool kids went to a different party that night and didn't want to go to the party we threw for everybody. And I'm like, wait, this whole story was about race and this had nothing to do with race. And like, by the way, the kid's a good kid. His dad jumped a gun and he's a good guy too. But just sometimes we want to think things out, but it's okay to like for people to backtrack and go, hey, actually, you know what? We made a mistake. Like that's not what this was. Because Utah, I think, has this, what's the best way to say this? Like almost like this.
This is why it's good to let things play out sometimes. Don't just jump the gun and have to act like the worst thing in the world is happening. Just slow down, ask some questions, see what's going on.
No, and the thing is, I'm just, BYU's got to know, you got to be smart enough to know that usually people can also use the race card to get what they want to. And you and the thing is, right? Because here's the thing, though, I was just thinking, if you've been around different parts of the world and lived there, there's always going to be some sort of discrimination kind of thrown at you, or you tease it. I mean, even I'm just thinking, even in Tonga, if you're living in Tonga and you're from a different area or a village, sometimes you get discriminated for somebody else, or if somebody you get discriminated because you're not as close relative like somebody else and you miss out. So to me, this has so many layers. It's not just because you're a white or Asian
Well,
or black.
and no, to go along with that. So in one of my former companies, there were these kind of like group calls to kind of talk about, DEI, inclusion, and that stuff. And, it started to go your typical woe unto me. And, I was just sitting there listening. And then they asked me, well, what do you think, Tua? And I said, well, I've been on both sides of the fence here. And he goes, what do you mean? He says, I don't think this is a uniquely American challenge, right? Because I told him, I said, believe it or not, when I grew up in Tonga, I was the white guy. Right? I remember playing rugby in Tonga, getting on the field, and the first thing you would hear is, I got the white guy. Tukoy parang ikaw. Like, I got that guy. You know what I mean? And it was trying to intimidate you, to try and be like, oh yeah, this is
not
the
as
weak link
physically
on the
strong.
team.
This is not the physically strong one. I can handle him.
I can take this guy, So I told him, I said, so I grew up in Tonga and I'm known as the white guy. Then I come to America, and then because I'm the quote unquote white guy, I get isolated sometimes. My first day at high school, standing in assembly at Tonga High School, I get into a fight, right? Just because I got picked on, and I think it's just because, Luke Palang is like, oh, well, a little bit is because of my older brother. Found out later there was a little bit of tension there, but basically I explained, I was like, I've lived in Tonga, I've been, I wouldn't call it racism. That's just normal behavior of kids, calling them out. And then you come to America, and then all of a sudden you don't fit in both places, but that's just life. That's just normal. Like we have to just adapt to those, because and that's just what I told him. I said, I don't think this is a uniquely American problem. This is just a humanity problem across the board.
No, and here's the line I'm starting to understand to it, because we get certain people who are not used to mingling with people from different races. They jump the gun most of the time. You're talking about, and I'm just thinking, BYU management. I'm just thinking athletic director, he's Caucasian. I'm thinking of BYU president, Caucasian. Some of their assistants and stuff are probably people who don't know how to react, and they're folding from pressure from outside because it's such a racist thing, and to accuse this kid, pretty much accuse it. And I remember the athletic director, it went viral to him coming out to the BYU students and giving them like a pep talk about what's happening and the racism, and saying how we shouldn't be using all these things when nothing really did happen. And that's to me, that's what's part of that issue. And it's gonna probably, in order to sort this out, it's gonna take people from, probably, especially in America, the Hispanic, blacks, and Polynesians, to kind of step up and just pretty much play a role in making sure that it is a racist thing instead of jumping the gun a lot of the times.
Yeah,
And I hope,
crying
yes,
wolf when it's
crying wolf,
then
because
it devalues when a real problem
real
happens.
real problem happens. And the thing is there are bad actors of people who are whatever ethnic or race or color. They're going to use certain things like the racist card to get what they want or to accuse somebody, and it could be somebody innocent. So yeah, that's just kind of my spill on that.
Yeah, we'll continue here. We're about halfway through.
They're this what's the word where you're like insecurity. They're like have this insecurity about like we want to make sure everyone knows we're not racist. And it's like I really don't think most of racism is kept alive by people trying to claim racism where it's not happening. I think they're obviously I don't want to minimize that it happens, but like the majority of these incidents we hear is just not the case. And so like this was one of those times.
I want to stop it real quick because it reminds me of a story. I was sitting at, so you go to BYU, you've been in the Wilkinson Center, Masi.
Yeah.
So you know you have like the Cougar Eat area, and then you
Yeah.
have the table that we were sitting in like that open area. It's like a rectangular shape where there's a bunch of tables. We used to hang out there quite a bit, and while I'm sitting at the table there, all of a sudden the story of racism, because it's a bunch of the Polynesians, right?
Yeah.
Like there would always be like one or two tables. We would all sit there together, have lunch, talk, and then people will go to class, come back, and you're just kind of rotating back and forth. And one of the times I was there, all of a sudden the discussion goes to racism, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm looking around, and they go, "Oh man, this place is racist. BYU's racist, blah blah blah." And then I look at them and I go, "Hey, what was your GPA?" I was
Yeah.
looking, what was your GPA? Oh, like a 2 point something, 3 point something, whatever, right? And I was like, well, I'll tell you this. If this place was really racist, none of us would be here, because why? Everyone that I see that is Caucasian has probably like a 4.0 or higher. And there's a bunch, like a bunch of
Yeah.
the kids who go to UVU, really smart kids. It's just
Yeah.
there's not enough space at BYU for all these
Very
people.
competitive. Very competitive.
And so
BYU.
and so I was just telling them, I said, hey, I'm not saying racism doesn't exist here at BYU, but I'm just telling you, let's be honest with each other. If it was really racist, you and I wouldn't be sitting here at BYU, because why? There's a lot more kids who academically excel and would be in this seat, but they've gone out of their way to make a space for us. So let's not the stereotypical saying, throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Let's just save the baby, hold the baby, throw everything else. But kind of like what he's saying, when you cry wolf all the time, then it devalues how bad when something really does happen that's real.
Yeah.
Where you just wish there had been some adults in the room that would said, what, a mistake was made.
That's it.
Let's take care of the people so that this kid doesn't have to live. I mean, by the way, if you meet your son, like he's a very calm individual who it's just somebody he's been stripped of his friend group. He's got to be worried about how he's going to be perceived socially. It's really damning, and it can be a huge issue. And so anyway, I just preface that to say, like, in this case, obviously at the time you're watching this and discovering that, wait, this didn't happen.
Yeah.
And so, are you in touch with, BYU? Are you in touch with Tom
everyone.
Holma? Are you in touch with?
We're trying to heal as a family. Remember, our daughter had just taken her life. And then the next December, my brother, who is my creative director, died of a heart attack. He had that heart attack New Year's Eve, 1 year after my daughter. 6 months later, my dad died. And so you're talking for this young man here. Josh, by the way, you are an exceptional young man. There's no father that could be more proud than I am of my son. I love him exactly how he is, and he's just a phenomenal young man. But the kid is suffering. His older sister was like a mother figure to him.
And look at that. Look at like, talk about doing no harm. This is why you have to be very careful when you make these decisions. You can't just jump the gun. Look, what would have happened if this kid, heaven forbid, did something to himself?
Yeah.
Because of everything that's going on with his family across the board, like, this could have turned out even worse. Like, if the kid did something to himself, and then we find out later he's 100% innocent and BYU played a part in
just
crazy.
banning him from events without, not like, banning him while the investigation was going. Usually, you don't ban somebody. You just say, just calm everything down and just do your investigation, and then you do the result. You do your judgment. But yeah, that was just very interesting what BYU did, and it was more trying to save their image, and they didn't really care what happened to this person, and that was the sad thing about it.
Yes, and it's because they're operating off of a principle of fear instead of like what you were saying. Hey, let's take a deep breath. This takes leadership. I mean, and that's the thing.
Yeah,
leadership is not easy, but it can be done correctly if you just know what your mission and your goal is. And the mission and the goal is do what is right.
Yeah.
You know, like the hymn says, do what is right, let the consequence follow. Just
Yeah.
go with that and see what happens.
Yeah. No, and I was just I remember somebody asking me what it, defined what is doing what's right. And my definition of doing what's right, when it's inconvenient for yourself or inconvenient for close family members and friends, but you got to tell the truth, that's what doing the right is. And that's what BYU should have done. To be true in this instance, they should have just done their investigation and told all parties to calm down, and then they will give their conclusion after the investigation. But I feel like they folded outside of pressure, which I feel like, BYU, like I said, it is known to be that beacon and be the different amongst other universities to do something different, but they folded in that instance to that pressure, like most people would. But,
Yep. Sweet. Let's jump right.
Right. My brother Mike that passed away was the uncle or aunt that he was closest to, and my grandfather may have been the person he was closest to. So gone. Sure. Right. And so now here he is trying to get through life, and he gets accused of this. And so this was his friend group, as you pointed out. There were two kids that he went to high school with. One was on the women's BYU women's team. One was on the BYU men's team. And was his social group. That's who he hung out with. That's who he did things with. And now all of a sudden he even is stripped anymore. Of that. Yeah. And it was really hard as parents to watch that, knowing that it's happened to maybe the best human being that you've ever known, and that people wouldn't come to his defense. And I think that the dagger was when not just like some of his sports heroes were tweeting terrible things about him, but Governor Spencer Cox put out there, called him a racist asshole.
The governor did?
The governor did.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, and then Spencer, he actually apologized, but yeah, like he jumped the gun too.
See, and this is because the signals, I think the more we're listening to this, Masi, you're right. The signals BYU was sending out was this kid did something wrong.
Yes.
We banned him immediately.
Yes. At the same time, still doing an investigation, but you're putting that indicator that this person is somewhat guilty. Then you allow networks and media outlets and influential people to start throwing whatever to this kid, treating him like trash, which was unfair.
That's crazy. That is crazy.
Hurtful as that.
Did he ever retract that?
I think he did, but I mean, like,
but there's something to be said if you're you kind of gotta, sit on that for a minute before you,
yeah. You know how you made this 19-year-old feel? Well,
and it's kind of funny. I didn't think the conversation was gonna be about this, but it goes back to one thing: self-preservation. He's like trying to cover his own ass using as the governor of Utah. Throw this kid under the bus. It's just one bad egg, That's what,
and whether or not he was innocent or guilty,
sure,
is it appropriate for the governor of your state to reach out to one of the college kids in your state that's a resident of your state with no information and call him a racist asshole? That to me is unfit for governance. Period.
Wow.
So all right, so you're dealing with all that and trying to figure out. So at what point did the story finally? Because BYU did their investigation and came out and said, we found no wrongdoing. Yeah. This didn't happen, basically.
We actually pushed that. So I reached out to Tom Holmoe and said, look, with the video evidence, you can clearly see the facts that are coming out in the media it's impossible that they're true. There's no possible way. So you can see that in one of the sets, he wasn't there, and video evidence shows he wasn't there.
So he's I think I remember he was getting some food or something,
and he has credit card evidence. Yes. Credit card evidence to support that. The last time that the player that accused him was serving, the cameras zoomed in on her and only one student in the background, and it's Josh, and he has his mouth closed, clearly saying nothing. And even the officer said that
I was going to say the officer was standing there during that portion of it, even, right?
Yeah.
Now I know why the officer was there standing, just listening
Yes.
to
Yeah.
see if he
And there was
heard
nothing.
anything.
Yeah. Because
You know,
apparently they were receiving during the game. I guess she was telling the coach, and the coach told the officers that there was racial slurs thrown at
so
these
basically, from the moment the police officer showed up until he left, they know for a fact there weren't any racial slurs during that timeline. So the only timeline they're looking at is before that,
Correct.
right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Through different portions of it. So my point is, like, the video evidence alone refuted it. And to your point, he would have had to have been yelling racial slurs over the Duke bench team to the person serving, people who he was 4 to 6, 7 feet away from. And then when the officer came and stood there, they had the whole rest of the game to just turn around right behind him. And if they leaned forward, they'd be a foot and a half from him and say, it was him. It's that guy. But they didn't.
So they do the investigation. They come out and they say, we found no wrongdoing.
What they did at the beginning is I said, please lift the ban. It's causing unbelievable stress on my son. Like he's already in a tough spot. Please lift the ban.
The players were doing the same thing too.
Yeah, the BYU players were doing the same thing too. And he said, no, we still have to investigate. And I said, and then so I had to get an attorney involved. And the attorney said, look, let's just be honest. You think it's intentional infliction of emotional distress? And BYU said, yeah, we're still not going to lift it. And then the attorney said, well, you should know that if once his name becomes public and there are people who already know who he is, then you go into defamation claims. And his dad owns a business that's worth like a lot.
Yeah.
And then that's when they lifted the ban the next day after just
Wow. See?
So Tua, this is what I was gonna
talks
say.
even in the Lord school.
No, and this is what I was gonna think, Tua. I just like, man, because obviously he's threatening with lawsuits, right? And obviously this kid's family come from a position that
Some
they
money.
can
Yeah.
some money. And I'm trying to give the benefit of the doubt for the school that they're trying to do the right thing to take away the ban, because I know they took away the ban. But now I'm hearing the other side. They're saying they kind of, like you said, he had to have attorneys involved, and I'm like, my goodness. So even BYU, they were even telling him no until the threat of lawsuit. So that it's crazy. It's just so crazy that the amount of harm that they were going to cause if there was no threat from the victim's family to sue them.
That's crazy. Yeah. We believe in doing what's right until the lawsuit comes.
Well, dude, yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I really, really do hope BYU learns from this. No matter what situation we are or the climate we're in politically or racially, BYU needs to stand firm and live by its principles. But in that case, they definitely bended towards the pressure of the worldly things. But yeah.
Dang, interesting. See, I never heard this part that the dad's like, hey,
Yeah.
he didn't do it, lift the ban, and BYU's like, yeah, we're not going to, even though we know he didn't do it. Oh, okay. Well, now we're gonna sue you because you're gonna impact my business, and so the multiplier of the damages is high. All of a sudden, okay, crazy.
Yeah.
Obviously tell us they wouldn't do it. So having all my friends say, hey, isn't it great that they lifted the ban, also stings a little bit. Did they do it because it was the right thing to do and they're protecting him? Or did they do it because they realized that there was claims?
So they publicly came out and said they were lifting the ban, that they found no wrongdoing.
Yeah. Like, well, can I read what they said?
Sure.
So
it's the same thinking that caused them to jump the gun is the same thinking that was the delay in correcting that they were wrong. Right? It was the concern of, if we do it too early, then it looks like we don't really care about it. But if we don't act right away, then they're going to say we're blah, blah, blah. Once again, operating under a principle of fear. And BYU, we would expect more.
Well, and this is the thing, too. Where's that? What's contributing to that fear? Is it fear? Is it fear that they want to have this? They want to be a perfect and not be such a racist school or something? Like, where's that fear coming from? Because to me, I mean, of course you're gonna have some fear, but at the same time, BYU is known why its existence is there. Right, is to be different and be a beacon of light to the world and to other universities. To me, I'm trying to figure out, why do they act in such a fear? Is it I mean,
leadership, man. That's a
Yeah.
reflection of the leadership. Because why? It sounds like the players and probably the coach were like, yeah, we're going to stand by this kid.
Yeah.
But not the leaders. The leaders were operating under fear. That's really what this is. This is a reflection of the leadership. And it's unfortunate because that gives us a certain insight into the way they think and what they fear and what they seek to get the validation from, as far as I can see, from the wrong sources and for the wrong reasons.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And by the way, can I just give a shout out to Tom Homo?
Sure.
So Tom Homo reached out and apologized to Josh.
He's the BYU athletic director.
Yeah, he reached out and apologized to Josh twice.
Oh.
And so first he did it on a Zoom meeting, and then Josh.
How long after, right
after they lifted the ban?
Okay.
And then he invited him in, and
you mean right after they were accused of getting sued?
Yeah. Well, and this is the thing, because I wasn't a Tom Homo fan, especially when he came out and kind of did his scolding and stuff, especially when the investigation was going on and all of this kind of stuff. He was kind of telling how a bunch of the BYU fans didn't like, kind of like scolding a little kid and stuff. And then I didn't hear he apologized or anything, so I wasn't really a fan of him, and I was kind of perceiving him as like, man, what a weak
sauce.
leadership guy, weak sauce. But then I'm glad to hear the victim story. At least, like what you said, he came apologized twice because lawsuits were probably going to come his way because he was probably going to have to deal with it because it happened during an athletic event. But I'm giving him the benefit. I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt because that's what I would like to be treated to if anything were to happen to me. But I was glad that he apologized and made it better and try to make up for what happened to the kid. So I'm glad, and now I'm kind of back on a neutral thing.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
what's your thought? I mean, that's just me.
Obviously, he was part of the ones.
Yeah.
It's highly probable because we weren't there. We'll give him that. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that we weren't there, but it's highly probable he was one of the ones pushing ban him right away.
Okay, I wouldn't be surprised.
I would. I mean that's just unless someone above him was pushing it down. Unless he was saying no, let's hold on. But my gut feeling, and I could be wrong, but my gut feeling is he was like, yeah, we gotta make that clear that he's banned, And the funny part, I guess the father here is just trying to be politically nice, like to think Tom Homo, but the reality is he didn't come in and apologize once they knew they were wrong. He waited until the ban was lifted, and now we know the ban was only lifted after they were threatened.
Threatened to throw some lawsuit. Yes.
Yeah.
And I just want to let people know that he apparently runs a pest control business that's pretty popular. That's multi-million worth. So yeah, I mean, this guy was gonna throw everything at BYU, and it's gonna probably lead to more never-ending headlines in the news. So BYU knew they had to do something.
No, and that's why the lawyer was saying, you do know this guy's dad, his business, and let's say it's a $50 million business a year. It could be more, but if it's a minimum of 50 million, and they tie it that, hey, I potentially lost $40 million over 5 years because of this defamation, that's a lot of money. I would apologize twice.
Not because that's the right thing. It's because money was floating in the air, potential loss. Oh man, come on, BYU.
Come on, Cosmo, come on.
Josh, maybe you can tell us about what it was like when the invite.
So Tom Homo invited you to come in and kind of apologize, essentially.
Yes. So right after the ban was lifted, he invited me in, and he offered me like season tickets to everything. I politely declined. He did, however, give me a BYU athletics jacket that only the student athletes have access to, and I've been able to sit in the student athlete section at some BYU football games, which is I think 3 or 4 rows from midfield.
Wow, awesome.
Yeah, so that's typically. Like when I was playing football, those are some of the tickets they give to the players and their families and stuff. Are those tickets? So he's got some nice treatment. I love that he's like, yeah, we'll give you season tickets to everything. I was like, really? I wish you were this thoughtful when you were thinking about banning me, Mr.
Yeah,
Homo.
yeah,
So
yeah.
hilarious, man.
I will say, man, it's a tough position to be put in. You imagine being Tom Homo that day and you first hear the news, right? You're like, you've got to be kidding me. Now I got to deal with this. And so, and there's so many lessons. And I think that's one of the reasons why, I think it's cool that you're sharing the story, Josh, is because there's just a lot to learn here. And I think, Tom is one of those guys that I don't envy the position. I think he does a hell of a job. Imagine getting that call, right? We just had a problem at the Duke game. One of the students was yelling racial slurs. You're just like, oh my gosh. Like they're trying so hard to build a good reputation, get into the Big 12 and all these things. And you have to deal with that. So there is empathy on all sides. But what I think the lesson here is I guess for me, the lesson is consider everybody involved. Like even that kid should have been considered in that moment instead of throwing him under the bus, right? Like even if he did, and you said it very well, even if he had done it, there still could be some consideration done there. And especially since he hadn't done it, hadn't even been conclusive that it would have been done. It was just kind of speculation at the time.
Jimmy, I want you to think about, I'm going to tell you what Utah Valley University did. I want you to contrast this to what happened when my daughter passed away on BYU's property. Utah Valley University, when they saw the news that it was a Utah Valley University student, before they had any evidence to say the person was innocent, they got together at the highest levels and they said, this kid's going to need counseling because they're getting eviscerated by the media, just destroyed.
Wow.
It's got to be unbelievably damaging psychologically, which it was and is. And so he went to the dean of student life, and the dean of students actually walked him physically to the counseling session that they had already prearranged before we told him that he was a student. How cool is that?
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really
Utah
cool.
Valley.
Hey, props to your alma mater, Masi. They actually were thinking ahead like what you would expect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they easily could have let's get our hands off the kid. He's bad news, blah, blah, blah. They were actually saying, hey, we recognize there may be something going on there, but we got to figure out what's best for the kid.
No, and I was just thinking too that even some of our own experience, especially when mom was at Leahona, and how they operate kind of like a BYU mentality,
On
right?
steroids.
On steroids, right? We know those stories, and I still have memories of them, and it's the reason why mom kind of chose to stay in Mu'a with family members who were not of the faith, and she felt more comfortable with them because they were treating her right than people of the same faith, same growing up in the gospel, and how she was being treated there. So I'm just kind of like the UVU and BYU treatment just for this instance, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like
Lessons to be learned.
There's certain leaderships that really need to figure out in a way to don't, like I said, you're just flesh and bones. Don't try to be somebody that you're not. Don't pretend like you're trying to do something. Just do what is right and don't get pressured by. You think you're being a righteous person by doing this and being strong, but you're not. You just need to do what's right and care about the both sides and don't react so fast with no evidence. But that's what I was thinking to when they were comparing how when the father was explaining how UVU was treating how they treated the situation compared to BYU, and it just brought back to memories, especially with mom not being able to stay on campus compared to how she was being treated at Leohonna compared to the village with bunch of many family members that were not of the LDS faith. But
not 100%. I mean, what's the phrase? A prophet is not welcome in his own village or town. Meaning, sometimes the people that you would think would be most understanding and most protective are the ones that will have the hardest time sometimes.
Correct.
So
correct. And this is what I say. This is what I say, Tua, and that's why the good thing I only go church to God the Father and Jesus Christ, and not to people who are perceived as in a position that are doing what the Lord's work. You go to church for the man above and not for anybody else. And
nope, 100%.
That's the only way to navigate. That's the only way to navigate these times. Because, like I said, everyone, if you're a human being, you're gonna have flaws.
Yeah, 100%. No, you're right. You're right.
Like the way you do anything is the way you do everything. But let's contrast that with what BYU did. BYU calls him at almost midnight so they can inform him he's banned, so that they can annihilate him within the press the next day and say it wasn't a BYU student. It was, and then they kept sharing more and more.
See, not thinking about the individual that could be innocent. It was all about protecting the brand. And hey, guys, I love BYU. Hey, I'm a BYU graduate, but we're just trying to be objective here. The kids just offer a couple hours and then you've banned him? Like, okay.
Right before midnight. Yeah, like
this is totally, anti-American, you can say, due process, right? Innocent until proven guilty. There are just so, apart from just from the gospel side, but even from just a general thought process of let's just see how this plays out, find the facts. But no, I mean, it's concerning. It's like, yeah, we gotta ban him now so we can,
cover ourselves. And say this is not a BYU. He's and then not even that. I remember seeing articles that this was like a handicap. They were throwing some crazy stuff at this guy. Crazy stuff.
That's crazy.
More personal information about him as time went on. Them and the Deseret News.
Well, thank goodness, by the way, though, that like there was enough things that were off on this story, because I remember when the story broke. And again, I swear I was like the first one tweeting like, this is bullshit.
You were. That's why we're here again today. You were the first and only one that stood up for him, and you and I had not talked.
No, I didn't know it was your son till a month later. But ultimately, I was just like, no, like this is wrong. And it was cool though to see all these national people, because the story did. Well, and there's two parts of this. The story did get very clear by the end of it that this didn't happen. But even then, there was people that wouldn't admit, like, I think people would just like, well, we're still going to stand by what our players said or whatever, I think is what Duke said or something like that. And so you're like, wait a second, like, and I get it. Like, it's really hard to admit that you lied about something and that it was a really serious thing to lie about, but you see this more and more. Like, I think the Johnny Depp trial was a good example of this. It's a guy that got eviscerated for what happened. And then you hear it in court and you're like, oh my gosh, this thing was a setup, And then you've got the Jesse Smollett thing that happened, right? And it's like, hold on a second. This keeps happening. And it's like, I'm glad that there was those kids. What was the case where they kept trying to say they were being racist? You know what I'm talking about?
That was Covington.
Yeah. And they got sued for a lot of money and they won. And then you had the Chiefs fan, that kid that's like 9 years old, and they tried to say he was racist.
Uh-oh. What happened here?
Maybe it
Did you know that AI is set to create 97 million new jobs by 2025?
To Duke's players and team staff. That sounds like everyone cooperated, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, it does.
It's very carefully done. From our extensive review, we have not found any evidence to corroborate the allegation that fans engaged in racial heckling or uttered racial slurs at the event. So it might have been a good idea, since you totally tore him apart in all the accusations, if you listed all of the evidence that showed that it wasn't him. For to say there's actually video evidence that shows that this isn't possible. There's other evidence of this that shows this isn't possible. The people sitting right next to the fan, there was a BYU police officer standing right there that didn't hear it. And in the video, there's also a Duke assistant athletic director that nobody's talked about yet, because he's standing in the back right behind where Josh is, and he's in a blue shirt. You assume he's BYU, but it's Scott Mosier, assistant Duke athletic director Scott Mosier. So I'm told that's who it is. So here's how Nina King responds. It's almost to me as
Nina King.
She's the Duke athletic director.
Got it.
So Tom Holmoe basically says, we reached out to over 50 people, including the coaching staff and players of both teams. Nina King says this: we unequivocally stand behind with and champion them, especially when their character is called into question.
Like basically saying that she was lying.
She's saying that. She's saying that the kid we identified said those racial slurs. Duke and so Duke athletics believes and respect equality and inclusiveness, and we do not tolerate hate and bias. What a hypocritical thing to say. What about the hate and bias to my son? And what about the hate and bias to the state of Utah? It wasn't just Josh who was and still stands slapped in the face. It's the entire state of Utah,
sure,
as you pointed out, right? And so,
because it's funny. There's the Atlanta bomber, right?
Yeah.
overweight guy. I can't remember his name, but anyway.
Jewell?
Yeah, thank you, Richard Jewell. Yeah, you got your history, bro. Nice work.
Do you know who that is? I don't know who that Atlanta.
No.
Okay. All right.
No idea.
I was talking to as I watched the movie. Did you watch the movie? It came out a few years ago about it.
Yeah.
As I'm watching it, I remembered him being the bomber. Like he was innocent, but because the news turned that story so badly, that's what the movie's about, is this poor dude that got obliterated by the news. And I still thought he had done it. Like even as I just talked about trying to get the guy's name, I said the Atlanta Olympic bomber. Like I still called him that, the poor guy. And I think he's dead now or whatever. Like that's terrible. Like it's really hard to shake those once the news is like called you, and once the governor has called you something, once these things have happened, it's really hard to shake that for the rest of your life, even, you know.
Recordings just got better.
That's pretty it, Mussy. That was pretty much.
No,
crazy.
but that's it. I wanted just to for us to react to that, especially with our connections to BYU. We're still fans of BYU, and I just hope BYU learns this lesson and don't jump the gun. Hopefully, leadership. Come on, don't be of the world. Don't don't react in a way that most universities would do. But I'm glad they corrected and sent an apology. There was nothing, but they could have handled it a lot better.
Way different. And I think the lesson learned here, I think, is don't rush to judgment.
No.
Right? Even regardless, and that's one of the things that when I was younger, I would kind of say I was frustrated many times with the church. It seems to move so slowly, right? So slow. But now as I get older and you get more experience, slow can be a very good thing, right? Because you're not jumping the gun. You tend to damage less people when you're just moving at a steady and predictable pace. And that's what BYU should have done. They should have grabbed that kind of approach and say, hey, we're going to figure this out. We know that this is going to hurt people. Let's be mindful. Don't send the kid off and then within 2 hours ban him, right?
Yeah.
Because once you ban, and then once you say that you've taken action, there is a presumption that there's evidence that person. That's why the governor goes on social media and calls the kid a racist. That's why everybody's blowing up and attacking the kid, because they see how BYU behaves and they assume, oh, there has to be a reason why BYU is acting that way. Lesson learned here: don't jump the gun, be thoughtful, and do what's right.
Do what's right. Yeah. Oh, and I wouldn't be surprised that Duke player. I wouldn't be surprised if this was like pre-planned. The person probably did a history check on BYU and its history with how they've dealt with minorities and just the state of Utah. I'm pretty sure this person's done its homework to do all that, because once this person did this accused, she was all over ESPN and everything. So yeah, we just need to be mindful, and like what you said, just be slow. We all hear certain rumors that kind of comes here and there. I don't really think many of it, because like I said, you just don't know. They're just rumors until you kind of know for sure what actually happened. But yeah.
There's Dan Bongino, he calls it the 24-hour rule. He says once you hear something, don't make a decision, don't act on anything, wait 24 hours. Give it 24 hours before you make a decision or act, or at least act. BYU would have been very wise to adopt that rule, right? We're not going to ban anyone. We're not going to accuse anyone. Let's wait 24 hours. Let's see how this plays out. So said, once again, everybody, it's been a pleasure. Appreciate the feedback. Appreciate the involvement. Everybody have a great evening. And until next time,
see ya.
We'll see ya. Bye.